You can believe in God with everything you have and still feel anxious. And if you are honest, that is where the real tension begins. Because anxiety does not just make you uncomfortable. It quietly raises a question that feels dangerous to answer. You start wondering what this says about your faith. You do not usually say that question out loud. You don't post it. You don't even pray it directly. But it sits underneath everything. You begin to wonder if something is wrong with you, if you should be further along by now, or if trusting God is supposed to feel steadier than this. So when anxiety shows up, it rarely comes alone. It brings a second voice with it. That voice begins to suggest that if you really trusted God, you would not feel this way. It tells you that if your faith were strong, your mind would be calm. It implies that if God were pleased with you, this struggle would not keep happening. And without realizing it, anxiety stops being just an emotional struggle. It turns into a spiritual accusation. That is why so many sincere believers do not only feel anxious, they feel exposed, as if their inner world is betraying what they claim to believe. This is usually where people go wrong. They try to fight anxiety by becoming more spiritual on the surface. They pray longer. They repeat the same words with more intensity. They make more promises. They analyze themselves more deeply. They try to correct the feeling by applying pressure. But pressure does not bring peace. It only trains the nervous system to stay alert. Here is the part most people miss. Anxiety is not proof that you don't trust God. Very often, it's proof that you care deeply and feel responsible for outcomes you were never meant to carry. That does not make you faithless. It makes you human. And that's exactly the kind of person Jesus was speaking to. When Jesus talked about anxiety, he was not addressing rebels. He was not correcting people who didn't believe. He was speaking to devoted people. People who woke up thinking about provision. People who worried about tomorrow. People who felt the weight of responsibility pressing on their chest. And instead of shaming them, Jesus did something very precise. He exposed a misplaced burden. Because anxiety does not begin with fear, it begins with ownership. Ownership of outcomes, ownership of timing, ownership of what might happen if you stop staying alert. Anxiety quietly suggests that if you let go, everything will fall apart. So you hold tighter. You carry tomorrow in your thoughts. You carry conversations that haven't happened yet. You carry problems that are not in front of you. And your body reacts as if all of it is happening right now. That is why anxiety feels so real. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real event and a rehearsed one. This is where guilt quietly sneaks in.
Somewhere along the way, many believers were taught that trust should erase tension, that faith should feel calm, and that confidence in God should silence the body. So when anxiety persists, you begin to assume it means failure. Failure to trust, failure to surrender, failure to believe correctly. But Jesus never taught that trust feels like numbness. He never taught that faith shuts down the nervous system. He taught something much more grounded. He taught where responsibility belongs. That is why his words about anxiety are not emotional. They are structural. Jesus does not say to stop feeling this way. He says to look at what you are carrying. He points to food, to clothing, and to tomorrow, not because those things do not matter, but because worry sneaks in when care turns into control. And control always comes at a cost. It costs your peace. It costs your clarity. It costs your ability to rest inside God instead of striving toward Him. This is why anxiety often shows up most strongly in responsible people. People who do not want to fail. People who do not want to let others down. People who feel that if they stop thinking, planning, and rehearsing, something bad will happen. That mindset does not come from rebellion, it comes from pressure. And pressure, when left unchecked, trains the body to stay on guard. Prayer begins to feel tense instead of relational. Faith begins to feel like effort instead of rest. And God can feel distant, not because He moved, but because your inner world is overloaded. Here's the truth most people never hear. Jesus did not confront anxiety by demanding better behavior. He confronted it by reassigning trust. He redirected attention away from outcomes and back toward presence. That is why His words feel confronting and comforting at the same time. They expose the lie that everything depends on you, and then they release you from that impossible job. This is also where many teachings stop too soon. They tell people to trust God, but they never explain how trust actually functions in the nervous system. They do not explain how to stop carrying tomorrow in your body while still being responsible today. They do not explain how Jesus' words translate into lived experience, not just belief. That is what we are going to do here. Because if anxiety has been making you question your faith, this is not a call to try harder. It is an invitation to reposition. It is an invitation to stop standing where pressure lives and to step back into the place Jesus was pointing to all along. In the next part, I'm going to show you the specific sentence from Jesus that is almost always misunderstood, the one people quote quickly but rarely apply correctly. And once you see what He was actually saying, you will understand why anxiety does not mean you're failing God, and why peace begins to return when responsibility finally rests where it belongs. There is a sentence from Jesus that almost everyone has heard at some point. It's quoted in sermons, it's printed on books and mugs, it's shared whenever people want to encourage someone who is overwhelmed. And yet, it's also one of the most misunderstood things Jesus ever said. When people hear it, they usually feel one of two reactions: either relief, because it sounds peaceful, or immediate failure, because it feels impossible. You hear it and think, I would love to live like that, but I don't. Without realizing it, you begin to translate Jesus' words into an emotional command, as if He were saying that you should simply stop worrying, calm down, and be at peace. But that is not what Jesus was doing. Jesus was not issuing an emotional demand. He was exposing a location problem. When Jesus speaks about tomorrow, He is not really talking about time. He is talking about where your attention and responsibility are sitting. Tomorrow is not just a future day. Tomorrow is a mental space. It is where imagined outcomes live. It is where what if multiplies. It is where pressure grows without resolution. Anxiety begins when tomorrow moves into today. Not when you plan, not when you prepare, but when you begin to carry tomorrow as if it is already happening. This is why Jesus adds something that most people rush past.
He says that each day already has enough trouble of its own. That is not pessimism, that is realism. Jesus is acknowledging that today already carries weight. So when you add tomorrow's weight on top of today's load, something begins to break. Not your faith, your capacity. This is where guilt needs to leave the conversation. Jesus never implied that worrying thoughts make you a bad believer. He implied that carrying extra weight makes you human. And here is the shift most people miss. Jesus does not tell people to abandon responsibility. He tells them to relocate it. You are responsible for today. You are not responsible for controlling tomorrow. That difference is not only spiritual, it is physiological. Because your nervous system cannot tell the difference between something you are experiencing and something you are rehearsing. When you mentally replay future problems, your body responds as if the threat is already present. Your heart rate shifts, your muscles tense, your breathing changes. Prayer then happens inside a body that feels under pressure. And when prayer happens inside pressure, it begins to feel like effort. You are still talking to God, but you are talking from a place of defense instead of trust. That is why so many prayers feel heavy. Not because God is distant, but because your body is bracing while your mouth is believing. Jesus understood this. That is why he does not say, "Do not think about tomorrow." He says, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow." In other words, do not move tomorrow into your chest. Do not allow future responsibility to sit where only present grace belongs. This is also why Jesus uses examples like food and clothing, not to shame people for caring about real needs, but to reveal how quickly care turns into pressure. It begins with responsibility, then concern grows, then control takes over. And control feels responsible until it starts costing you peace, because control keeps the nervous system on constant alert, and a nervous system on alert cannot rest even when God is trustworthy. Here is something important to understand. Anxiety is not the absence of faith. Very often, it is faith trying to operate outside its proper boundary. Faith was never designed to hold outcomes. It was designed to hold relationship. That is why Jesus keeps redirecting attention back to presence, back to today, back to what is actually in front of you, back to what you can do now instead of what you fear might happen later. This is not passive living, it is precise living. This is also where surrender is commonly misunderstood. Many people think surrender means not caring, not planning, or not thinking ahead. But Jesus never modeled disengagement. He modeled anchoring, anchoring attention, anchoring trust, anchoring responsibility. He showed people how to live fully in today without dragging tomorrow behind them like a weight. That is why anxiety begins to loosen when responsibility is reassigned. Not because fear disappears instantly, but because your body stops carrying something it cannot resolve. Here is a critical correction. When anxiety shows up, it does not mean you stepped outside of God's will. Often, it means you stepped into a role that was never yours, trying to guarantee outcomes, trying to prevent every possible loss, trying to protect everyone from pain. Those are heavy roles, and Jesus never asked you to carry them. That is why his words about anxiety do not shame you, they free you. They quietly say, you do not have to hold this. And once you see that, the entire tone of prayer begins to change.
Prayer stops being a place where you prove trust. It becomes a place where you release weight. In the next part, we are going to move from understanding to practice. I will show you how Jesus turns this teaching into a lived experience, not through ritual and not through religious effort, but through a simple repositioning that signals safety to the body and clarity to the mind. And when that happens, peace does not feel forced, it feels natural again. Up to this point, everything we talked about changes how you understand anxiety. But understanding alone is not enough, because anxiety is not just an idea problem, it is a body problem. It lives in sensations, tension, and automatic reactions. So if we stop here, you might agree with everything and still feel anxious. Jesus never taught truth only to be understood. He taught truth to be lived. That means his words were meant to land not only in your beliefs, but in your body. This is where the shift becomes practical. When Jesus redirects responsibility back to today, he is not asking you to ignore tomorrow. He is asking you to come back into the present moment, where grace actually operates. Grace does not live in imagined futures, it lives in now. So, the practice Jesus invites you into is not complicated. It is simple, but it is not easy at first, because it goes against how anxiety trains you to live. Here is the core movement. Anxiety pulls your attention forward.
Jesus pulls your attention back. Anxiety says, "What if?" Jesus says, "What is actually in your hands right now?" This is not denial, it is grounding. And grounding is how the nervous system learns safety. So let me show you how this works in real life, step by step. Not as a ritual, not as a religious exercise, but as a repositioning. First, you need to recognize the moment anxiety begins to take over responsibility. That moment usually sounds like urgency. Your thoughts speed up, your body tightens, your mind starts scanning for outcomes. Instead of fighting that feeling, pause and name what is happening. You can say this internally, in plain language. I am carrying tomorrow right now. That sentence does two things at once. It interrupts the spiral, and it tells your body the truth. You are not in danger, you are in anticipation. Next comes the most important step. You consciously return responsibility to where Jesus assigned it. You do this by asking a very specific question. What is required of me today and only today? Not what might be required later, not what could go wrong, not what you are afraid of losing, only what is actually in front of you. That question sounds simple, but it is powerful. Because anxiety survives on imagined responsibility. When you remove imagined responsibility, anxiety begins to lose fuel. Then comes the part that most people misunderstand as prayer. Prayer in this moment is not asking God to fix tomorrow. Prayer is agreeing with God about where you stand right now. You can say something like this in your own words. God, I am not strong enough to hold tomorrow. I give you what does not belong to me, and I take responsibility only for what you placed in my hands today. That is not weakness, that is alignment, and alignment creates relief. Here's why this works. When you return responsibility to God, your body receives a signal of safety. Your breathing begins to slow, your muscles soften, your thoughts lose urgency. Not because problems disappeared, but because your nervous system is no longer trying to solve what it cannot resolve. This is the kind of peace Jesus was talking about. Not a peace that denies reality, but a peace that comes from standing in the right place. Now, this is important. This is not a one-time decision. Anxiety will try to pull responsibility back again and again. That does not mean the practice failed. It means you are human. So, each time anxiety returns, you repeat the repositioning. You notice it, you name it, you return responsibility. This trains your nervous system over time. Just like anxiety learned urgency through repetition, peace is learned through repetition as well. This is why Jesus spoke the way he did. He was not giving people a slogan, he was giving them a way to live.
A way to work, plan, love, and care without collapsing under pressure. This is also why gratitude shows up in the teachings of the early church. Gratitude is not about being positive. It is about anchoring attention in the present. When you thank God for something specific today, you pull your mind out of imagined futures and back into lived reality. That is why gratitude calms the body. It confirms that grace is already active right now. Here's another important clarification. This practice does not remove responsibility, it refines it. You still act, you still make decisions, you still plan wisely, but you stop acting from panic. You stop planning from fear. And when fear is no longer driving, clarity returns. That is when wisdom becomes accessible. That is when you can hear God more clearly, not because he started speaking louder, but because the noise inside finally settled. This is the peace that guards your inner world.
Not a fragile peace that breaks when life gets hard, but a grounded peace that holds when pressure rises. This is also why shame has no place here. If anxiety returns, it does not mean you failed the practice. It means you noticed earlier than before. That is progress. Jesus never measured growth by perfection. He measured it by direction. Are you learning to return? Are you learning to release? Are you learning to stand where grace lives? That is what matters. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. Anxiety does not mean you are failing God. It often means you've been trying to carry something He never asked you to hold. And peace does not arrive when you force yourself to calm down. It arrives when responsibility finally rests where it belongs. If this resonated with you, I want to invite you to respond, not out of pressure, but out of honesty. Have you been carrying tomorrow in your body? If yes, type "I release it" in the comments, not as a ritual, as a declaration. Because naming what you release is often the first step toward letting it go. And if this helped you, consider staying connected here. We talk about faith, the nervous system, and real peace the way Jesus actually taught it. Not as theory, as life.
Before we close, I want you to hear this one last time, without hurry. Anxiety does not mean you are failing God. It does not mean your faith is weak. It does not mean you missed something spiritually. And it does not mean God is disappointed in you. Very often, it means you have been trying to carry what was never meant to rest on your nervous system. Jesus never invited people into peace by demanding emotional control. He invited them into peace by restoring order. Order of responsibility, order of attention, order of trust. And when that order returns, peace does not have to be forced, it emerges. This is why the invitation of Jesus still works today, because it does not depend on circumstances changing, it depends on position changing. Not where you live, not what you are facing, but where you stand internally. So, if anxiety has been part of your story, let this reframe stay with you. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not a disappointment to God. You are a human being learning to release weight. And learning to release is not failure, it is growth. Now, I want to guide you through a short prayer, not a dramatic one, not a desperate one, just a grounding prayer you can return to anytime anxiety tries to take the lead again. You do not need to repeat it perfectly, you can listen, or you can make the words your own. God, I acknowledge that I have been carrying things that do not belong to me. I have been holding tomorrow in my thoughts, trying to protect outcomes, trying to prevent what I cannot control. Right now, I choose to return responsibility to you. I release what is not mine to carry. I accept what is mine to steward today. Teach my body that it is safe in your presence. Teach my mind to rest where grace already lives. I trust you with what is ahead, and I remain present with what is here. Amen. If this message spoke to you, I want to invite you to respond in a simple way. In the comments, type, "I release it." Not as a ritual, not as a promise, just as a marker, a moment where you chose alignment over pressure. And if this kind of teaching helps you, consider staying connected here. This channel exists for people who love God deeply but want their faith to bring peace, not pressure. We talk about scripture, the nervous system, and real spiritual alignment the way Jesus actually taught it. Without shame, without performance, without fear. You did not fail God, and you do not have to carry this alone.